The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was a watershed moment in the history of Africa, marking the beginning of the Scramble for Africa by European powers. Convened by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the conference brought together representatives from major European countries to discuss and establish rules for the colonization of Africa. The outcome of the conference was a division of Africa into spheres of influence for European powers, setting the stage for the partitioning of the continent and the colonization of its people. One of the key outcomes of the Berlin Conference was the arbitrary drawing of borders across Africa, without regard for existing tribal or cultural boundaries. European powers, eager to grab as much territory as possible, divided Africa amongst themselves in a manner that suited their own interests, without any consideration for the wishes or rights of the African people who lived there. This resulted in the creation of artificial states that often combined disparate ethnic groups and neglected traditional systems of governance, laying the groundwork for future conflicts and instability. The consequences of the Berlin Conference were devastating for Africa. Millions of Africans were displaced from their lands, subjected to forced labor, and exploited for their labor and resources. The colonial powers implemented policies that stripped Africans of their land, decimated their traditional economies, and imposed harsh taxation and labor regimes that effectively reduced them to second-class citizens in their own countries. The social fabric of many African societies was torn apart, as traditional customs and institutions were undermined or destroyed by the colonial administration. Economically, Africa suffered greatly as a result of the European colonization that was born out of the Berlin Conference. European powers plundered Africa's natural resources, including minerals, timber, and agricultural produce, to fuel their own industrial economies. The wealth that was extracted from Africa benefited Europe, while leaving the local populations impoverished and disenfranchised. The legacy of this exploitation is still felt in many African countries today, as they struggle to overcome the economic and social inequalities that were created during the colonial period. Furthermore, the European powers at the Berlin Conference agreed to the principle of the effective occupation of territories in Africa as a means of legitimizing their claims. This essentially gave them carte blanche to exploit the resources and people of Africa for their own benefit, without any regard for the well-being of the local populations. The colonial powers set up administrations that were focused on extraction and exploitation, rather than on the development and upliftment of the indigenous peoples. In conclusion, the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was a pivotal moment in the history of Africa, marking the beginning of a dark chapter of colonization and exploitation. The arbitrary division of Africa by European powers, without regard for African borders, cultures, or people's wishes, led to the harsh exploitation and domination of African nations for economic gain. The legacy of the Berlin Conference continues to shape the social, political, and economic landscape of Africa, underscoring the need for a deeper understanding of the historical forces that have shaped the continent and its people. We hope this Majestic Mind Matters University sponsored Mandatory Mental Liberation Series information, produced by Baba Jelani Bamani Dembe, was instrumental in your royal quest for more knowledge of self on your journey to melanin-rich culture enlightenment. Alkebulan, also known as the Mother of Mankind, embodies the rich cultural heritage, diverse landscapes, and royal historical significance of Africa. Originating from ancient Afro-Asiatic languages, the name symbolizes Africa's role as the cradle of civilization and ancestral homeland. Associated with continental pride, unity, and identity, Alkebulan highlights cultural diversity, history, and global contributions.